we love snacking. The US and UK are like massive snacking nations.
Yeah.
And so one study that Professor Sarah Berry did, was actually just swapping snacks to almonds. And it improved the participants' blood markers across the board. And that's like a pretty simple switch.
Raw almonds.
Just almonds. It wasn't even raw.
Oh.
Which is unsalted though. So like just roasted,
Not
or raw,
chocolate covered.
almonds, yeah. So like, because we don't realize, and the reason why we have such a high intake of energy from snacks is because they're high, like they're energy dense. It's not because we eat loads like big snacks.
No.
It's because they tend to be like, frankly, unhealthier. So biscuits or protein bars, like they're just full of crap. Or it might be like they're high energy and not very healthy. So if you can switch your snacks to like a handful of almonds and a fresh piece of fruit, or to like a little yogurt pot with just actual food, whole food that is beneficial, you can make a big difference there. So I think start with breakfast, then tackle your snacks. And then when you're building plates for lunch or dinner, try and follow that approach of how you build the plate.
Is there any way,
Yeah.
without me signing up for Zoe,
Yeah.
that I can look at my poop
Yeah, there is.
and know that I might be doing the right thing in regards to my gut health?
Yeah, so there's two things, okay? So the first thing is transit time.
Okay.
So transit time means how long does it take for the thing to go from your mouth to your toilet?
Okay.
Do you call it toilet here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or loo, I don't know. I never know. So then how do we do that? Two ways. Eat a bunch of beetroot. Don't have a heart attack.
Okay.
Anyone who's had like a beet salad.
Yeah.
I remember, so when I moved to New York, it was like beet salad was the thing. Do you remember this?
Yes,
It was like
yeah.
a big thing. And I'd never eaten a sole beet salad where it was just beets. And I just moved to the US, and like 2 days later, I'd eaten so many beets that my actual urine turned pink. And I was like,
I'm bleeding.
oh my God, I have a kidney infection. And then I was like, oh no, I just ate loads of beets. So, but you get the same thing when you eat like a good amount of beets, your poo will turn like red or pink. So that you can measure. So essentially like measure what time you ate the beet and then check your poop, which people should do anyway. They don't. And just see like when the color appears. You can do this with sweet corn. So if you eat a bunch of corn, because it's so hard to break down, you tend to see it in your poop. You just have to eat quite a lot of it. Or you can make like a blue muffin. So blue is another color that shows up very strongly. Measure that transit time. And we did a big study called the blue poo study. And we had like the whole nation do blue poos with muffins. And because so many people took part, so we did like a big citizen science project, we actually found that the sweet spot of transit is between about 14 hours and about 30 hours.
Wow.
So that's like a healthy transit time. So really...
It's longer than I would have expected.
Yeah, 30 hours. Yeah.
So just over a day.
It's a high ceiling.
No, it's not. So like, you know, pooping daily is the ideal situation.
I think the perception is that you eat and then you have to have a bowel movement. You feel like
oh yeah, people think
things
that,
have
yeah.
but
no, but the
obviously it's not that
gastrocolic
quick.
reflex makes you
Right.
feel like that.
Right.
So when you eat, and this is people who don't have nerve damage in their gut, sometimes this can be really disruptive if you have bowel surgery and the gastrocolic reflex goes. So gastrocolic reflex means when you eat. So if you think of your gastric tube, it's like one long tube. As soon as you hit up here, like it starts to do this movement called peristalsis, and it travels all the way down.
Yeah.
And so then it moves like the food through your large intestine as well. And it's quite a long, large area. So when you eat your breakfast, it's usually breakfast, tends to, like, your gut's had a rest overnight, peristalsis has gone down. You have your breakfast and you get the gastrocolic reflex. A large number of people go to the toilet in the morning after breakfast. But that's yesterday's, or maybe normally yesterday's food if you're not constipated.
Right.
So that's the kind of sweet spot. And that is a really good, when we compared that transit time to gut microbiome composition, it's actually a very good correlation. It's like people with healthy gut microbiome composition tend to have a transit time in this gap. He won't mind me saying this, but like, of course, Tim Spector is like on the 15, 16 hour. He's like super efficient.
Optimized transit
Of course
time.
he is.
Perfect.
Yeah. But really, if you're going to the loo twice a day, that's really good. But if occasionally, and especially in women, cycle phase can impact the motility of your gut. So it might be like a day and a bit.
Yeah.
That's good. If your transit time is longer than that, that is a sign of constipation. Another thing we did was something called the Big Poo Review. The titles are good. The largest ever survey of bowel movements.
Wow.
And we had over 40,000 participants that logged their bowel movements for us. And, I think because it's on an app and it's anonymous, people were very honest with us. It was a real treasure trove of data for like understanding. And we found a shocking amount of people suffered with such severe constipation. I think 9% of such severe constipation they had to manually evacuate.
Wow.
That's insane.
9%.
9%.
Wow.
So that's like, that just tells you. And constipation is something which people think it's like a transient issue. Like constipation is really not good. Like people feel terrible.
Yeah.
It increases bloating. So often people say they're bloated, but it's a result of constipation.
Sure.
Then you get paradoxical diarrhea where they think they actually go into the loo, but it's not. It's bad. So it's something to look at. And what I would say is constipation later in life can actually be dangerous. So a lot of hospitalizations in older people is
about small bowel obstruction.
Yeah. So anyway, that was really interesting. And you can do that. That's one way of like understanding your gut microbiome composition. And then the other thing is like your gastric symptoms, right? So if you're suffering with bloating, you're suffering with constipation or unpredictable like bowel movements, it's a sign that your gut's not happy and not performing super well. And I mean, I would go as far as to say that if your mental health is suffering a lot, like that's another sign. Like if your gut microbiome isn't happy, your mental health, all the research we have suggests that your mental health will suffer. So those things to look out for. And of course, like we know there's such a high fiber deficiency that is literally why we created Daily 30.
Yeah, 95% was striking.
Yeah, that's literally because when you think about, so what would the vast majority of the population benefit from? Increasing their fiber intake and their plant diversity, so you get the variety of fibers for the microbiome. So that's why we created the Daily 30 supplement.
Yeah. What about smell?
The smell of poo. Oh, right. So if we're going down like the identifying, that's more like, so change in color, change in smell can be a sign of dysbiosis, but it can also be a sign of something more serious. So going back to like the colorectal cancer awareness thing, any kind of new pain in the gut, and IBS, one of the hallmarks of IBS is pain. So it's new pain. But also like if there's a color, like a black color or bright red tends to be lower down. So, but if you get something that looks like blood or like digestive, it's definitely a red flag. And then smell can be actually is one of the flags for colorectal cancer. So getting, especially, so in some of the questionnaires, it's like described as being particularly acidic smelling. So burny smell. If that happens regularly, you might have eaten something dodgy, but if it's something that you notice, like it's definitely worth speaking to your doctor about it. So like our poo is a real insight to what's happening. And it's also worth noting that like different medications impact all what we've spoken about, like our microbiome composition and how we poop and how regularly we poop. One of the things that is very regularly prescribed and has a negative impact on our gut health is proton pump inhibitors. So being aware of that, and to your point, review your meds. Is if there's something that you can change, or if you're like someone who has very regular heartburn and you're actually popping Pepto-Bismol like every day. Is that here? Pepto-Bismol? Is that here? Not good. Like you need to address why that's happening, because there's a downstream consequence and probably a cause that needs to be addressed for that symptom.
The thing we're trying to bring in this podcast is something more tangible, and we've gotten into the weeds. We've talked about some of the science. We've zoomed in on micronutrients and some demonized foods, some things that are probably okay, some hidden truths about whole grains and whatnot. But maybe you can walk us through how you would shop for the week. And think about breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. And maybe if we have time to go through the infant aisle, what we would look for?
Okay, so I think of it, instead of the aisles, I think about what do you need on your plate, because then it applies to any meal. So whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, build your plate up with split it into quarters in your mind. Okay, so like one half is plants, leafy greens, root veg, beets, colorful mushrooms, whatever you like in terms of plants. The more variety, the better. So if you can get some cabbage in there and like maybe see what's seasonal to you, go for it. Then 1/4 quadrant is going to be like your whole grains. And sometimes it'll be the pearl barley and the spelt. Sometimes it might be a good quality durum wheat pasta. And maybe some other days it's like not a whole grain, it's a rice. But, basically a carbohydrate source, ideally higher quality, is 1 quadrant. And then your final quadrant is where you put your preferred protein source. This should vary between oily fish, if you eat meat, occasional white meat or red meat. So like they should both be less frequent. Beans, lentils, tofu, tempeh, and then sprinkled on top of your plate, you have sources of good fat. That varies from avocado to nuts and seeds, extra virgin olive oil. So that sounds good.
Yep.
You got that. Now, when we think about changes, though, often people like to think, hey, what should I change first? Because you can have this basic template for your dishes and it works across the day. But often what we find is like there's 2 things that are easy to change because it tends to be more within people's agency and they contribute a large amount of the energy like intake. So the first is breakfast, which on average is 20% of our energy intake for the day. So it's quite a portion of that.
Yeah.
So if you can change your breakfast, people tend to be home or they tend to be able to grab something from home to take with them. So it applies to either scenario. And breakfast, if you can change that to include these foods, so it can look like having a yogurt like an overnight yogurt that you made the day before with like a bit of natural yogurt, some whole grains in it. So maybe you put some porridge oats in there, some frozen berries, some nuts and seeds. You've got yourself like a fiber-rich, nutrient-dense, polyphenol, everything done. And you can just put it in the fridge. They keep in the fridge for 4 days. Yeah. So you can make them in a batch, take them with you. Or it might mean that you're actually boiling a couple of eggs and then putting a little pot of hummus with crudités in it. And you're taking that with you and a handful of nuts and an apple. And that's like on the go. So there's different ways of doing things that don't have to be super hard. If you're home, you might be able to make yourself like a lovely omelette with vegetables and mushrooms and spinach. And you might then have a really nice sourdough rye bread, which isn't strictly like a whole grain in itself, but it's one of those carbohydrate sources that can be high quality, and enjoy that at home. And you could even have some smoked salmon with that. So there's different ways of doing it that are either quicker or a bit have a bit more time. You could be making your steel cut oat porridge with nuts and seeds, berries, a little bit of kefir in there, right? Then you have the other thing that contributes actually on average 25% of energy intake. So it's even more is our snacks.
Wow.
So we love snacking. The US and UK are like massive snacking nations. And so one study that Professor Sarah Berry did, was actually just swapping snacks to almonds. And it improved the participants' blood markers across the board. And that's like a pretty simple switch.
Raw almonds.
Just almonds. It wasn't even raw. Just unsalted though. So like just roasted,
not
or raw,
chocolate covered
almonds. Yeah. So like, because we don't realize, and the reason why we have such a high intake of energy from snacks is because they're high, like they're energy dense. It's not because we load like big snacks. No. It's because they tend to be like, frankly, unhealthier. So biscuits or protein bars, like they're just full of crap. Or it might be like they're high energy and not very healthy. So if you can switch your snacks to like a handful of almonds and a fresh piece of fruit, or to like a little yogurt pot with just actual food, whole food that is beneficial, you can make a big difference there. So I think start with breakfast, then tackle your snacks. And then when you're building plates for lunch or dinner, try and follow that approach of how you build the plate. So what does that mean for your grocery shopping? Well, it means like the first thing is try not to buy ultra processed foods at all, because you don't need to. Actually, there's foods that are easy to carry and quick to make that you can just have at home. Leave ultra processed foods for when you're out and you don't have a choice, or for specific things that, like we talked about, that are a bit more nuanced. So maybe you're not used to eating beans, but you quite like baked beans. It's like, okay, have that. Sure. Or maybe a rye bread or a sourdough isn't affordable to you because they're really expensive. Mm-hmm. So you might buy like a granary bread from the supermarket, which is technically ultra processed, but it's on that spectrum of like actually good to have in your diet. It's not going to harm you. Yeah. So try and limit though what those ultra processed foods are, and the ones that you do buy, make them these staples that have beneficial things in them. Mm-hmm. So that your actual dark chocolate covered almonds are a good example of like the dark chocolate covered almond, which may constitute as a UPF because it's been processed in some way, is going to be better for you than buying, I'm going to say Twinkies again, but they're both snack foods. Right. Or like the Snickers bar, which is nuts and chocolate, but very different. Right. So try and limit those. Go to the unsexy aisles, like go to the middle aisle, bottom shelf, and just try and buy some of the whole grains, try and buy some of the lentils, and start experimenting with those. Then get the frozen berries, get the frozen vegetables that are easy for you to make at home, like the broccoli, the cauliflower, frozen green beans, all these things, and add those to your shopping. And where you can, like, buy produce that's affordable to you. So like yogurt, eggs, maybe you buy a whole chicken. Like buying a whole chicken is more convenient, it's more economically like affordable than buying chicken parts. You get more chicken for your money. And you can then like use the carcass for broth. There's other things you can do. So like a little bit of that. I think buying the basic stuff like the carrots, the onions, the garlic, and the fresh fruit, having them in them at home and making an effort to like chop them up and add them to your cooking adds flavor, and also actually is contributing to your fiber intake and to your diversity of plants. So and our key part of this is, of course, what we were talking about earlier, which is the cooking skills. So if you can invest in a cooking course, it's a good one to do. If you can't, there's lots of information available online. So like our Instagram account has loads of recipes. So that's like at Zoe. There's also lots of recipes available in different cookbooks and websites. So like try and see things that inspire you to cook different foods.
What about fermented foods?
Yeah, so fermented foods is like super easy to make, right? No, kefir is a bit temperamental actually. So you can buy kefir from the store, although if you can find a kefir that's actually made with kefir grains, which you can't buy in store because it would explode because they're very live. So like the store-bought kefirs are essentially yogurts that have strains added to them, just because kefir grains are literally live. So if you buy real kefir, or you can buy kefir grains online, by the way, and make your own with milk. What you'll see is like every day that goes by that it changes more. It like keeps fermenting. You got to take the grains out at some point. Or you get cottage cheese. And then basically they're really good to include. But sauerkraut is so easy to make. Like I make it with my kids. You chop cabbage up, wash it, put it in a bowl, add some salt. Like it's about 5% of the weight. So for a cabbage, I'd say like a teaspoon of salt is enough. And everyone's like, oh my God, there's loads of salt. Don't worry about it. Wait. So you massage that in. You get all the juices out. It gets liquidy. Keep massaging. Then have a jar ready and have that dishwasher clean. So like it's clean, but you don't have to like sterilize it or anything. Just clean. Pop the cabbage in there with its juice. You can add herbs. You can add like some garlic in there. You can add some spices, whatever you like, or just simple. And then make sure the juice is covering the cabbage. If it's not, boil some water, cool it, and then add that. So like just make sure it's submerged. You want it to be anaerobic. And then use the external leaf of your cabbage as like a lid, so you can push it down and just keep the external cabbage and shut that, right? After a day, you'll start seeing bubbles, and leave that like on the side in the kitchen, but not in the sunshine. So out of the sunshine. And you'll start seeing bubbles rise up, and it'll start to like change color. So especially if you use red cabbage, it's really cool to see how it changes. Wow. And every other day or so, you burp it. Sounds so gross, but you basically open the lid to let the gases out and then close it again. And after like 3 or 4 days, already. So especially if you finely chopped it, it's already a sauerkraut.
Wow.
And people are like, how do I know if it's gone wrong? Trust me. You do. Like, it
obvious.
stinks. And if there's anything growing on it, like, no, you don't want that. It's really obvious. What it smells like when it's lacto fermented is like this acidy, like almost vinegary smell. Not vinegar, but that kind of smell. And so you leave it 4 days. I like to leave it for a bit longer, say like 7 days. And then you have your sauerkraut. And you pop it in the fridge, and then that's it. Like, you can keep that for weeks because it's a live product, but that's just been put to sleep in the fridge, and it's acidic, which keeps any pathogens out, basically. So it's like a self-preservation thing, and it's so good for us because you've gone from the humble cabbage, which has got fiber and polyphenols and it's good for you, to this fermented food, which has got probiotic strains growing on it. The postbiotic product of the breakdown. So it's got like loads of vitamins and amino acids that you would never find in a cabbage. And then the polyphenols have transformed, and there's now different other types of polyphenols. So it's fantastic. And you can eat that, and your gut will love you for that. Or you can buy it in the store if you're a bit scared of making it. But just make sure, for the store-bought ones, like, make sure it says live fermented. If they've added vinegar to it, you've just killed the microbes. Yeah.
That's interesting. All right. Before we go, where should people find you? And you just wrote an awesome book.
One other thing, like,
What?
water should be your main drink.
Well,
Sounds obvious.
Yeah.
But like, water.
What about all of the bubbly water?
The bubbly water,
now?
LaCroix.
It's water. Should
Is
be
it
your
still
main
This
drink.
is bubbly. But I've heard it
it's-
makes you feel a little bit bloated. It can
So
make
there's
you
actually
feel
weirdly
full.
there's some evidence around sparkling water, because it's got a different pH to, obviously, because it's carbonated. It's actually not good to eat sparkling water, and it's a minor effect. But technically, when you're eating food, it can impact like your digestion a bit, make it less efficient. I wouldn't worry about it if you're having like a bit of sparkling water occasionally when you eat out, but making sparkling water your main drink wouldn't be my recommendation. So while sparkling water is better than soda, just drink water. And then like kombucha is actually a good fermented food option that at least has some probiotics in it. But, you know, I do see people drinking all sorts of juices and smoothies. I mean, I've seen protein water, which I never thought I'd see, but here we are. So just like and especially if you've got kids, make water the main drink in the home. We see children drinking apple juices, or like Vimto type. Do you have Vimto here? Like these like cordials in their bottles, in their baby bottles. Don't start that. So like we know that sugar sweetened beverages are one of the most strong predictors of ill health. There's no doubt about that. That's why we even have the sugar tax, right? Don't start that. Like, water is the drink, and that includes not really overexposing your kids to juice, which, you know, might be unpopular. And I'm not saying children should never drink an apple juice or an orange juice, but it shouldn't be a main drink. So I think that's a last thing. And we didn't even touch on alcohol, but
I was going to swing you by the
know
alcohol aisle in
later,
this
so the
grocery
alcohol,
store.
I think, you know, I think we could just, one sentence I say about alcohol.
Yes, perfect.
Is that it is a neurotoxic carcinogen that has teratogenic effects on developing embryos, and very hard to defend drinking alcohol regularly, especially into older age. Like the effects of alcohol drinking on the brain in older age is mad to me.
Right.
You know.
One sentence I would say about alcohol would be that a study came out looking at the different risk factors for young onset dementia that we've talked about before.
Right.
Alcohol use disorder was a risk factor for the development of dementia in the young.
Right.
But interestingly, alcohol abstinence was also noted to be a risk factor for young onset dementia.
But is that one of those studies where alcohol abstinence was a result of sobriety?
Yeah, so we don't know. I mean,
we don't know.
It's the UK Biobank study.
Is it? So there's a lot of like the studies that were looked at for alcohol being protective used to not account for whether the abstinence was due to recovery or whether it was from birth. And obviously there's a confounder there. If somebody has had an alcohol use disorder and is now sober, the impact of the addiction is still going to be felt. Yeah, so I'm
That's
very
an
wary
interesting
of
point.
those. You know, it's
that's a great explanation, because the only one that I've come across is oh, well, you're, a communal atmosphere and being involved in your community is really important and can also be a preventative factor for dementia.
Yes.
So abstaining from alcohol maybe keeps you from doing that.
Yeah.
That's really the only explanation that I've seen.
Right.
It wasn't very satisfying of an explanation to me. But
and I think if you look to cultures where drinking is not allowed, you don't see this effect. So it's interesting. Like, I drink alcohol, by the way. Like, if anyone's wondering, like, I will have the occasional glass of wine or champagne, but it's so occasional, like the occasional bit. And people say, what about the blue zones? And like the blue zones, they are living a different life. They have resilience is very high, great diets, strong social connections, physical activity all day, living outside, like growing their own food, drinking alcohol that they make themselves, like with their family. Their body's ready for that. But here we are drinking our lunch, sitting in our cars, like eating plastic.
The last straw that broke the camel's back is the alcohol.
Eating no fiber. It's like, and also have this. And it's pro-inflammatory for the gut. So so it's like, if you do drink alcohol, I think it's just about really hitting that sweet spot of occasional, like, do I actually want to drink today? Okay, I'm going to have one glass of wine with a meal and enjoy it. But unfortunately, also, most of us don't have that relationship with alcohol. Like, I know I'm lucky that I can do that. Right. Most people find it very tricky to have that. So if in doubt, cut it out.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
So I'm on like all the social platforms, Dr. Frederica Amati. Yeah, my book is awesome, but I don't have a US publisher yet. So like,
oh really?
Oh God, yeah.
Well, they can buy it on
Amazon.
Yeah, on Amazon.
Great.
That's what I've been listening to on the audiobook.
So Audible, right?
Yeah.
So it's available there, and I read it. So if you want to hear more of my voice,
yes, which I was surprised because I don't think Dr. Spector didn't read his.
No, he doesn't like doing. It's really hard. By the way, like
I'm sure.
It was. I did it in 3 days, and it was intense. Like, and just hearing yourself all day.
Did you try to correct sentences as you were moving through it?
100%. So that you can find me there, and then I do on the Zoe Science and Nutrition podcast where I come in and tackle like the protein and the vitamin D,
emulsifiers,
the controversial ones.
Yeah.
So I'm also there.